All right, what's up, everybody? We are live. We're going to wait for a couple people to roll in before we get started. A number of coaching staff changes for the Saints, and we're still trying to figure out who the offensive coordinator is. We're still trying to figure out who the defensive coordinator is. We know that the Saints are obviously going with Dennis Allen at head coach, and there will be a number of changes beyond that. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out here over the next several days. But I have to say, I'm a little concerned in how this is playing out so far. The main reason I say that is when you look at the staff, there's a number of things when you talk about development specifically. And really, it's been Pete Carmichael for a long time as Sean Payton's offensive coordinator. And there's really been no one else. Doug Marrone, obviously, was really the only one, maybe Joe Lombardi, or two that kind of rose through the ranks and were able to get some other opportunities with other teams. But there was never any young hotshot. I mean, I guess you could throw out Joe Brady, but Joe Brady got an opportunity from LSU without ever really doing anything with the Saints. He was low on that staff, and he was kind of picking his brain. We are live. So, Jerry, good morning. Thanks for joining. Callum, good morning. He says there were more changes than he was expecting for sure. Kenneth, good morning to you. And he asked about Vic Fangio. I would love that as a defensive coordinator. It's interesting. I kind of assumed that Dennis Allen would pick either Chris Richard as his defensive coordinator, or maybe go with Ryan Nielsen. So far, the guys they've interviewed have not been in-house. And so it looks like they're going to look outside maybe and bring in someone new to look at it. The defensive backs coach of the Detroit Lions is a guy they've interviewed. So we'll see if he gets the job. At offensive coordinator, that's completely in flux. And I think the struggle and the problem right now is that for simplicity's sake and for carryover, they want to hire someone who knows the system. They want to run the Sean Payton offense. The problem is no one really knows how to run it. Because over the years, again, when you have Doug Marrone coming back, but he's going to be an offensive line coach, you're going to have no Joe Lombardi. Joe Brady is with the Bills, and I don't think that makes sense to bring him in as the offensive coordinator. So who are you left with? There's not a lot of great options unless you bring someone from the outside that was not part of this Sean Payton system. But then you have to change everything, and I think that makes it difficult. So I think the Saints are in a little bit of a struggle zone, a little bit of struggle bus with who to decide on as offensive coordinator. There's not a lot of options that make sense if you're going to continue down this path of consistency. And I just wonder, who has there been that's been developed? It's really, Sean Payton has not surrounded himself over the years with a bunch of young, hotshot minds. He's really kind of run his own thing, and he's had Pete Carmichael by his side the whole time. And it sounds like Carmichael doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to be the offensive coordinator calling the plays. He prefers kind of the support role, and that's the gut feeling that I'm getting, is that Pete Carmichael isn't really interested in calling the plays and being the guy. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go with this, but I do have a little bit of uncertainty and discomfort with how offensive coordinator goes, if I'm being honest. Jerry says Aaron Rodgers is not coming to the Saints. Well, that would fix a lot, because then, he can basically be the offensive coordinator too. But I agree. PX Saber, who dat? He says bring Bieniemy as offensive coordinator. I think he's staying with the Chiefs. I just don't think the Saints, obviously if they were going to offer him the head coaching job, then he would take it in a second. But offensive coordinator for the Saints, it's not a good job for him. He'd be better off, I think, staying with the Chiefs. Of course, I think getting out of Mahomes' shadow, Andy Reid's shadow, to maybe give himself a chance at succeeding elsewhere, to parlay that into a head coaching job, that all makes sense to me. But I just don't see that happening in New Orleans. Like he would have other opportunities that I think he would prefer, quite honestly. So we've talked about this. I've said that many times. But I don't think New Orleans makes sense for Bieniemy. Look, if they get him, I'd be thrilled. I would be pumped to get Eric Bieniemy on the staff. I just don't think it's realistic, but we'll see. Yeah, Kenneth says, do you run an offense that matches the talent that we have? What talent do you speak of? There's not much. And, the offensive line was maybe the strong suit for this side of the ball, and that has disappointed. We're kind of in limbo with Teron Armstead, not really sure what happens with him yet. So the offensive line could be going backwards. Uh, Possibility of Alvin Kamara being suspended, that's in play. That's a concern. So it's tough, man. It's you look at this all around, and yeah, that he kind of says that was a joke. Fair enough. Fair enough. But yeah, I don't know what you do with this offense. There's so many questions to me with who coaches it, who can do a good job, and all of that stuff. Let's talk about for a second the coaches that they've added and that they've let go of. They let go of CJ Johnson. That was a big surprise to me. He's kind of been on the staff for a long time, been an advisor, knows how the systems run. To me, like, he was maybe a guy, like, he's been around and knows the offense. Like, could he be a guy that could call the plays for the Saints? And so to let him go was a little surprising to me. Nugent makes sense because everything I've heard is that Zach Strief has done way more for the young offensive lineman than Nugent has. And so they bring back Doug Marrone. They replace Nugent. Zach Strief stays in place. For the offensive line, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's a great move. The Saints also get rid of Dan Dalrymple. He's a guy that was that again makes a lot of sense when you consider all the injuries. He's the head trainer, and he kind of ran physical training and all that for the Saints. So it makes sense to me that the Saints would look to bring someone else in, kind of similar to what the Pelicans did when they brought in the Suns staff because of all the injuries they were suffering through, and they just wanted to get a new regime in terms of fitness and player preparation. And I think the Saints need to go down that rabbit hole because the injuries have been out of control. And sometimes it's bad luck, and you can't always blame the physical trainer for that stuff. But I think making a change there makes a lot of sense. Johnson was a little bit more surprising to me. And now, look, the receivers didn't have a good year, and we knew they weren't good. But when you look at Traquan Smith not really giving the Saints much, I was a little disappointed in the development of Deontay Harris and Callaway. I was disappointed in the development of Lil Jordan Humphrey. They have a little bit of talent there. I mean, obviously, I think some people would say, well, what would you expect from those guys? Not that surprising when you consider the lack of talent and how that season went. But I feel like you could have gotten more mileage out of it. And Callaway was really the only one that I would say towards the end of the year showed some improvement. So you go get a new receivers guy, and we'll see who that becomes. It's going to be really interesting. But then offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator still not chosen. And look, it didn't have to happen over the course. So I'm not panicking by any means that they don't have a guy in place yet. And I think Dennis Allen will find his guy on defense. I think they have a great structure in place. They have great minds. Not only Dennis Allen, but we just talked about Nielsen and Richard. Those guys are on staff. If they're not the defensive coordinator, they're still great teachers in the building as long as they don't get hired and do something else. So I think you're in a good spot defensively, and obviously you have great personnel in terms of players as well. And we'll see what happens with Marcus Williams. That's the big one. We'll see if he can be retained. But on the offensive side of the ball, I'm worried. They don't have cap room. They don't have players. They don't have a quarterback. They don't have an offensive coordinator. And it's very unclear to me what direction they go in terms of a coach. And so that's the big piece. That's the first piece. And if Pete Carmichael doesn't want to do this, because to me, he was the obvious choice to kind of continue this Sean Payton play calling, who else can do it? I mean, unless you're going to have Doug Marrone do it, I don't know. So it's going to be interesting to see which route they go. PX Saber says, can we find a coach to teach Ruiz how to block? Look, that's why they brought Doug Marrone in. I think Doug Marrone is specifically back. He's been a head coach in the NFL. He's had much better jobs than this. And for him to come back, this feels a lot like a Nolan hire. And if you remember Nolan coming to New Orleans and coaching the linebackers, and we saw a transformation immediately like that at the linebacker position. For so long, the Saints struggled at that position. You saw young players, veterans, start to play better under Nolan because he's a tremendous teacher and, quite frankly, maybe overqualified to be a position coach. And I think that's what you get in Marone, a guy that's overqualified to be the offensive line coach. He'll work with Zach Strief, and I think in there you've got a great tandem. And if Ruiz is ever going to turn it around, like, this is the year. He's got 2 years under his belt as a starter. He's got the coaches to support him now, and there's no excuses. So this is it for him. Octoberist asks, why did Pete Carmichael take a demotion? Does he think he can't get an OC job? I think Pete Carmichael views himself as a supporter. And it was one thing to have offensive coordinator as a title, but he wasn't calling the plays. And I think he was more comfortable in a support role with Sean Payton. And I think that's kind of what he wants now. I don't think he's interested in calling the plays and having that pressure. And he's just, look, we all have our roles. Like, I was thinking about this the other day. There's this guy that I know that's a janitor at a resort, and a super nice guy. He's the greatest janitor of all time. He always gets Employee of the Month. He will never do another job. He could never be CEO. He could never get behind the cash register because he'd be a disaster with technology. He can't do anything but be a janitor. But he is incredible at that job. And I think that's it with Pete Carmichael. I don't view it as a demotion in the sense that he wasn't calling the plays before and he's not going to do it now. It's a demotion in title, but not in responsibility. He's a support guy. He wants to continue being a supporter. So I think that's the deal. Kenneth, I'm with you, man. Look, Bieniemy as offensive coordinator, Fangio as defensive coordinator, that's the pipe dream. That would be absolutely incredible. And if you could have anything, that's what I would pick. So I'm with you on that. I just think, again, is Fangio going to want to be in Dennis Allen's shadow? I think he's going to want – Dennis Allen's already said he's calling the plays. I think Fangio is going to want to go somewhere where he has full control of the defense because, otherwise he's – whoever's the defensive coordinator for the Saints is basically going to be Pete Carmichael on defense. Dennis Allen's running the show. He's calling the plays. You're basically Pete Carmichael. You're in a support role. I don't think Fangio is going to go for that. We talked about Bieniemy, offensive coordinator. I don't think he's going to go for that. So those two would be incredible. They would be a pipe dream, but I think that the two guys that you'll end up seeing in those spots will be much more underwhelming than those two. Look, we'll see what happens. Octoberist asks, how many receivers should the Saints try and draft this year? I'd like to see 2, man. I would like, and maybe 1 in the first round, honestly. Now, look, skill position, there's a number of ways you can go with that. The tight end room is a disaster. You can get a receiving, but there are ways that you can help your quarterback, your passing game, without just getting a wide receiver in the traditional sense. But you got to draft at least 1. And then at running back with Kamara, I think you got to supplement there. You need a tight end. So, and I wouldn't be against 2 receivers being picked. Now, they picked 1 last year, low round pick, and Quan Baker. I was hoping he would be a little bit better this year and contribute a little bit. That's another guy. Look, he's in the building. He's got some talent. You've got to develop him. And they really haven't done that so far. So that's been a disappointment. Will our quarterback be decided by the OC? That's PX Saber asked that. I don't think so. I think this is Dennis Allen's decision and Mickey Loomis and Jeff Ireland. They'll make that call, and they'll get an OC that'll call the plays and coach the guys up. But yeah, listen, offense is in a big conundrum right now, and it starts with offensive coordinator. And I don't see clearly who could do this job. If you're going to try to continue the Sean Payton offense, it's just too bad that it's always been Pete Carmichael, and there's been very little support around Sean Payton offensively that's been like these young hotshot coaches. Where it's crazy, where you see McVay or Shanahan, all their underlings keep getting plucked, right? That's never happened with Sean Payton. Joe Lombardi, Doug Marrone, that's the list. I mean, you could say C.J. Johnson, maybe he got a head coaching job at Tulane, but and none of it really panned out, by the way. None of them had great success going elsewhere. So Sean Payton is he's always had Pete Carmichael, and he's just never developed an offensive coach. And I think that's becoming a problem right now. Joe Brady, to me, again, the Saints never really developed him. He was just in the building, and he got the LSU job, and he caught lightning in a bottle. So, It's going to be tough. We'll be talking about this more once we hear the news. Hopefully, it'll be good news about the offensive coach. We can start to do a bit of research on him. I think it's going to be a name you've never heard of. I think it's going to be a surprise, and hopefully, it'll be a good surprise. If you haven't already, hit the like button. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. It really helps our podcast, and I appreciate your support so much. So please hit that like button. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. If you're new here, thanks for joining. And check out our podcast, Saints Happy Hour Podcast. We do a daily show. If you go to saintshappyhour.com and consider becoming a patron, you can get access to our daily show. And you can join us in our chat and our Discord, which is full of hundreds of Saints fans that talk Saints all day. But thank you guys so much for the support. We'll be back at this again soon. Lots of Saints news coming, so stay tuned. Who dat?